Hello and welcome to On the Money, where the business of Russia is business. I'm Peter Lavelle. What will define Russia's presidency of the G20? Will the most important global economies work in unison to solve the world's most demanding economic challenges, or will it be an exercise in kicking the can down the road, with each country guarding national interests? And why should the emerging market world really take notice of the G7? To discuss this and more, I'm joined by Chris Weaver. He's a senior partner with Macro Advisory. We also have Jacob Nell. He is the chief Russia economist with Morgan Stanley. And we're also joined by Maurizio Partonello. He is the CEO of Nestle Russia and Eurasia. All right, gentlemen, let's start out with, as we usually do with this program, the condition of the Russian economy. Chris, where do we stand right now? Are we standing still, or are we paddling water, or making
essentially
progress?
We're standing still. There will actually be a pickup in the economic indicators for the second half of this year. We had a weak first half in terms of looking across the board of macro numbers. We'll have a pickup in the second half because of the base effect of a weaker second half of last year. But come next spring, it'll be fairly clear that the economy is stable, but essentially moving sideways, somewhere between 2.5%, maybe 3% growth. That's not enough for an economy like Russia. All of the legislators, the politicians are all well aware that Russia needs more like 5 to 5.5%. So the whole discussion right now, even though we've got a relatively good number compared to other countries, is about how to boost up to the next level, to that 5%, and sustain it. So we're moving sideways. Government makes a big issue, I guess, a merit of the fact that we're stable, but now the word stagnation is beginning to creep in behind that stability.
Doing well relative to others, that's not good enough.
Well, look, we do have a very resilient consumer in Russia, backed by a tight labour market. That's going to keep growth ticking along above 2%. Now, I think there's also some upside out there, because we've had tight monetary policy up till now, and we've had very tight fiscal policy. If you look at the budget, spending was running at 30% growth rates in the first quarter of 2012 when we had the election. In the first half of this year, it was flat. That means down 6% in real terms. We're through that tightening of fiscal policy. So I think actually growth will surprise a little bit on the upside in the second half as a result of this easing of policy, together with that resilient Russian consumer.
So, considering the external environment, again, relative is good, but not good enough.
Well, if we compare what we are doing in Nestle Russia compared to the rest of Europe, definitely you can see the difference. I mean, much more dynamic. Consumer spending more than Western Europe. But of course, I mean, the expectation in this country is to have higher growth and more consumer spending, which we have seen slowing down a little bit in the last 2 years, I would say, and particularly in 2013.
Chris, does the government have the right growth policy?
It's hard to see what the policy is and the whole.
Well, that's
kind of
exactly why I'm
now.
asking the question, because it seems quite muddled to me.
You're right, and then there has been a lot of debate this year about what the policy should be. But instead, what we see is the government reverting back to kind of the tried and trusted, which is more spending via the budget, and of course more money going into pensions and into public sector workers, and that money then, of course, being part of the consumer story. But there is an ongoing debate about what the government should do in terms of policy changes, specifically to attract more investment.
Can you give it as an either-or type of policy direction right now for our viewers here? I mean, what are the major factions pushing for?
I think the Liberal reformers, which would essentially be the finance ministry, economy ministers, people like the former finance minister Kudrin, all pushing for more liberal policies to attract more investment in particular. And that means dealing with the perception of poor legal protections as well as red tape, corruption, but essentially tackling those sort of three big issues that investors constantly refer to as barriers to investing in Russia. And so to deal with those and to attract more investment into new industries and broaden out the economy that way. And as former Finance Minister Kudrin pointed out, these are hard choices right now that lead to short-term difficulties, but ultimately 3-4 years down the road is what you need to do today. And he accuses the government of focusing too much on short-term populism, not willing to take the pain, and therefore is going to pay the price later. On the government side, the default has been just more spending, and this debate which is now taking place about whether the fiscal rules should actually be abandoned, whether or not we should have more borrowing, and the government should actually pump more money via the budget into the economy. So in that sense, the debate essentially boils down to whether we should have continued kind of state control and a strong state role in the economy, or whether we should actually take measures now that will lead to more entrepreneurial activity. And that's essentially
so, Jacob, do they have the courage?
Well, I think there's a glass half full part to the story. I think that's the macro part of the story. So here, basically, what we have is Putin committing to a balanced budget and inflation targeting, and that was tested. The commitment to those two pillars of macro stability was tested during the growth slowdown, and I think it's very telling that they didn't increase spending and they didn't cut rates when inflation was high. So they kind of passed that test, I think. That's the glass half full part of the story. Unfortunately, there's a glass half empty part to the story as well. And that is, we have a good strategy improving the investment climate in order to attract more investment. It's just not getting implemented. That's the problem. We don't see enough progress on privatisation. We don't see enough progress on improving the investment climate. But it's not the right environment to do that. That's always the answer we get from them.
Well,
yes, but you have, I mean, particularly when you've just won an election with a mandate for reform, I think that you can take a couple of brave choices. Pension reform, I think, is one of the key ones. Unfortunately, it looks like we're heading through a pension reform where to finance the pensions, we're going to cut the contribution to funded pensions rather than raise the pension age. So, unfortunately, I think we're lacking political courage to take some tough decisions for long-term growth.
For a corporation like yours, what kind of growth strategy do you think that the government should be pursuing?
Well, you know, I mean, we are in an environment which is also very competitive, so it's not only linked to what are the government decisions.
Well, but you didn't build it type thing as well, okay? I mean, you have the environment that the state provides as well.
We have seen in recently a reduction in inflation, which for sure is very important for us. Also, it's important to have a certain stability of the ruble versus the other currencies because it's important for our business. On the other hand, I would say, as an estate, we've been here for nearly 20 years. We've been always supported by authorities when it comes to implementing our projects, whether factories or DCs in the regions where we create employment. So I would say in this sense I would like to spend a positive word about the way our company is being welcomed, and I think in general our peers have been welcoming in the country. So in the end we have to do the business, we have to create a growth for our business in the categories where we are in, and we expect the government to create the infrastructure and the environment to let us compete properly. And I would say we have not seen any degradation of it in the recent time, and actually we have a good relationship with the government when it comes to implementing our projects.
Let's talk about good relationships. Let's look at the global economy. Chris, where does Russia stand in the global economy right now? Again, we're looking at something relative, but you know, what is Russia worried about externally still? We still have the Eurozone. I guess we're going to have to get used to that for a very long time. Sure. And we have the growth in the emerging market world. I mean, where does Russia stand in this?
Okay, well, I guess two things. If you look at a snapshot, as we said earlier, the numbers from Russia actually look relatively good compared to everybody else. We should be close to 3% GDP growth with a pickup in second half. Inflation then falling, should end the year around 6%, having been at 7.5% in the spring. Got close on a balanced budget, a relatively stable currency. So it looks like a good picture. But we were saying earlier that for an economy that needs to be dynamic, that needs to grow, that's not enough. Russia needs to improve that. So Russia is very focused on growth in the global economy, because Russia is very much plugged into that in terms of export volumes. 80% of the value of Russia's exports are commodities, which are directly linked to demand and economic activity in places like China and the US, etc. So that kind of external factor is very important for Russia's current account trade balance and economic environment at home. And then the confidence factor. Again, we see that time and time again, that if there is, because we don't have a big pool of domestic investment, we're very reliant. Russia, one of its problems is it's very reliant on external capital flows. And investors they're worried about what's happening in the broader economy in the US, Europe or China, then one of their first reactions is to withdraw from risk, to withdraw from places like Russia, and we don't have that compensating pool of money domestically. We still have capital outflow, in fact, rather than
let's talk about capital outflow. Jacob, I mean, This is something we've talked about ever since, we've been looking at the Russian economy over the last 20 years. And any improvement in that area whatsoever? Because as Chris points out, I mean, domestically there's a huge pool to draw from.
Yeah, look, we've had capital inflows into Russia twice, and those have been, at periods when foreigners got excited about the prospects for Russian growth. In the 90s with the GKO market, and then in the run-up to the crisis.
Well,
and
I would call that
years.
Speculation. I mean, in the beginning. Okay.
Well, but I mean, that's been the only two times, so that Russia's had capital inflow. So it does look like a big structural issue, and structural issues tend not to be solved by waving a wand and passing a policy. They require consistent application over a period of time. And you need both a carrot, so improving
or
the
you
climate
need companies
here.
like Nestle to give a very good example of why you should come to Russia.
Well, we have been investing since we came here more than $1.2 billion over a period of 16, 17 years. So we have been investing a lot, and we continue to invest in this country because we believe that this is a country where we can get growth and return on investment at the same time. So I would say we are not concerned of this inflow, outflow, apart from the fact, of course, that it influences the total macroeconomic situation. But I mean, this is, I would say, we are not the only one investing in this country, and I would say so far we cannot complain on the return we had on these investments. We continue to have growth. We, as I said, we have been investing. We will continue to invest in the future as well.
Chris?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely with the consumer sector, and that growth in there is very clear, and it's been one of the fastest growing areas in the economy in the world. And Russia right now is the 5th biggest consumer market in the world, and per capita within the emerging market world, it's certainly the best, the highest spending purchasing power.
But that's not bringing money to Russia.
Well, this is the problem. You see, time and time again, we get back to the to the oil world again. Is it's balancing the budget. There's a lot of state money going around that can go into pensions and public sector workers, etc., which are fueling this. But there's no broadening of the economy. We're not seeing investment into manufacturing. We're not seeing investment into regions, into agriculture, into food production, etc. All of the things that you need to sustain and expand the economy long term. So to some extent, you could say absolutely right now, people are on the streets buying, consumer goods and expensive restaurants, etc. You get $70, $80
Let me jump in here.
We're
going to go to a short break. After a short break, we'll continue our discussion on Russia's presidency in the upcoming G20 summit. Stay with our team. Welcome back to On the Money, where the business of Russia is business. I'm Peter Lavelle. To remind you, we're talking about Russia's presidency of the upcoming G20 summit. But before we continue our discussion, let's have a look at the state of Russia's economy.
The first ever G20 finance and labor ministers meeting was recently held in Moscow. First and foremost, Russia and the world's future prospects were discussed.
Global economic conditions remain challenging. Growth is too weak, employment is too high, and recovery is too fragile.
Boosting growth and jobs is now the short-term priority for the global economy. It was agreed by the G20 ministers. Tackling unemployment was considered even more urgent than deficit reduction.
Yes, budgetary consolidation, reduction of deficit if you prefer, is a priority in the medium term. It's necessary to reduce debt. An economy that accumulates debt is an economy that becomes poorer. But the short-term priority, the one that we must act on, is growth and job creation.
Another topic on the agenda was greater tax transparency of multinational companies. The Secretary General of OECD, Angel Gurria, presented the organization's plan to close loopholes that allow corporations to avoid paying billions of dollars in taxes. Receipts to the government, investment in social policies easing job creation will be among the highlights at the G20 Leaders Summit hosted by President Vladimir Putin in September. The summit will hopefully be marked by seeing Russia dealing with accelerated growth issues. The Ministry of Economic Development anticipates the economy will be fueled by investment and so will expand more rapidly in the next 2 quarters. According to Russia's Federal Service of State Statistics, Russia's economy grew by 1.9% in the second quarter of the year. This is an improvement from the 1.6% growth it posted in the first quarter, but still well below the best-case scenario of 3%. Despite the slowdown, Russia and other BRICS countries continue to drive the world economy. In a recent survey, the World Bank revealed that Russia has overtaken Germany as the fifth largest economy in terms of purchasing power parity, and Russia's BRICS peer China is in second place. Nonetheless, global economy impacts the emerging world and its prospects.
What's happened in the last 5 to 10 years, there's been a huge investment in new supply of energy, new supply of commodities. And what we've had at the moment is not China's slowdown as the problem. I think it's Europe's collapse. There's 0% growth in Europe. They're not buying anything. They're not buying cars. They're not driving around as much. And as a consequence, China's slowing, yes, but Europe's just stopped. And at the same time, there's been more supply of new energy coming out of Kazakhstan, more oil out of Azerbaijan, more oil out of Iraq. Libya's turned back on again. And also you've had new iron ore mines, new copper mines, new aluminium smelters. And all of this together means there's more supply at the same time as demand has weakened because of Europe. And that's what's hurt Russia, I think, in the last year or two.
Hopefully, Russia will play its cards well, and its presidency in the G20 will bring results benefiting itself and the world economy. Lisa Lucan, On the Money, RT.
All right, gentlemen, let's talk about G20. Chris, what do you make of Russia's presidency of the G20? Because at this point, we see so many contradictory statements coming out of the G20 as opposed to when we look at austerity and we look at, borrowing. I mean, how do you make sense of it? Because has the German position collapsed? Have the Americans won? Job growth is the most important thing, because at Toronto in 2010 it was austerity, austerity, austerity. Sure. Now it's a mixed game.
Yeah, I think look, when it comes to G20 and Russia, they look at it in two parts. One, what Russia hoped to get out of it, and what it may end up with, which I think is, much less than was hoped for. Certainly a year ago, Russia was talking up much more optimistically of using the G20 as kind of a stage and almost a launch pad for kind of a new investment environment in Russia to start attracting a lot more investment in the country and to broaden out growth drivers away from, say, purely consumer to more manufacturing and other sort of core investment. And that really hasn't happened, because instead Russia hasn't delivered that sort of strong policy message to convince foreign investors that Russia is now moving in this new direction, still dithering over what should be the policy. On the external side, or looking at G20 as a group, I think it's becoming clear that the G20 is almost breaking up into different vested interest groups. The US.
So let me just ask you, was the G20 a good idea for 2008, 2009, up to 2010, but maybe it's more diluted right now because we do have so many different national interests and so many countries are reacting differently to the global crisis?
Yeah, and I think that's exactly it. So many countries are reacting differently. I think G20 was an excellent idea and was necessary in 2009. The London meeting in April 2009, of course, showed a great deal of unity and led to some very decisive decisions, the QE program, etc., which definitely pulled the world out of almost heading towards depression. And of course, for stock market investors, it led to a 2-year bull market. Yes. So it was definitely very effective in 2009, possibly 2010. But in the last couple of years, we have seen these divisions. And even, if you like, last year, the big discussion was on currency and preventing currency war. And what does the Japanese do? First thing, it's wax the yen in order to boost growth. So
and nobody said too much about it.
Nobody said anything. So I think now this whole discussion about currency, that's now drifted into almost regional or national issues. Although I do see that there is some more coordination at this meeting, or will be coordination at this meeting, on the question of tax avoidance and offshore tax centres. That's something that seems to unite all countries. It's kind of let's get Amazon and let's get Starbucks type of rallying call, as it were. But I think that's where it goes in terms of the growth indicators, or the coordination on growth that we've been looking for. That's falling well short. The US is now further into recovery. Europe seems to have stalled its discussions until after the German elections. China and Japan obviously following their own route as well. So I think in that side it has been a failure that the regional differences have emerged. But one or two focal points, such as tax avoidance.
But you don't need G20 just to do that.
No.
Okay.
No, but I think that's too negative an assessment, really, because the importance of these international organisations is really that they're there in a crisis. They're talking shops until you have a crisis, where you agree some useful things. But in a time of a crisis, you really need something. The thing about the G20 is it's much more legitimate than any other body. The G7 obviously is, the leading DM economies, and so it's not really complete. Whereas around the table at G20, you have the leading economies of the world, and it's proven that it can take decisions, particularly in 2008-9. So I think that it's actually a sign that we're getting back to business as normal. The world economy is not falling off an abyss into Europe is not collapsing. We have slow growth, stagnation in Europe. We have Japan, the US, and the UK picking up now. We have EM economies that were doing very well until recently, struggling now, particularly in places like Brazil and India, as rising interest rates mean that their dependence on external finance causes them some problems. I think actually we're normalising, and the fact that the G20
is that a good normalisation, though?
Out of the crisis.
Is that a good normalisation? It's the new abnormal.
Things could be better, but still, we think that the global economy is going to move out of what we call twilight, this stagnant level of growth that's not fast enough to reduce unemployment, into what we call daylight, which is a rate of growth that is large enough to start reducing unemployment around the world, particularly as we've seen in the US. So we think that there are some signs of hope and green shoots out there.
As a company representative, I mean, kind of reflecting upon what Chris had to say here, do you see, when you look at your company is in this market, an emerging market still, I mean, do you see these kind of markets still in line with policy making with the major, like G7, or do you see, as a company representative, do you make a separation between the two? I mean, emerging market strategy as opposed to an emerged market, a traditional market, because of the different situations that they have?
Well, each country has got its own strategy. It's not necessarily related to emerging, or it depends also on the competitive situation in each market. But I would say we have a common policy as an Nestlé across the world, and then of course we have differences country by country. From emerging markets we expect a certain number of things, particularly growth, and from other countries we expect different things. And I would say for me the G20, we have been participating to the preparation with the B20, so we've given our input. I think the G20 has to be there, even if there is no more crisis. Actually, they should make sure that there are no more crises. Of course, each country has different agenda, different expectation, different issues. As for a corporation, we have different issues in different countries. But I think their presence is important to guarantee a certain stability, coordination, and to talk to each other. And probably the fact that in the G20 there are also emerging markets that make it more relevant even than the G7 or G8. So for us, I would say Russia is a country where we want to get growth. Here is the country where we want to get growth in Europe. So our strategy is leading towards growth, investment, growth, innovation. And that's what we expect from Russia. Of course, we're not expecting the same thing from Italy or from Germany, where the issues are completely different. And also the consumer behavior is totally different.
Because again, within the confines of the G20, I think what is interesting is that you have some of the emerging markets within the G20. Their connections are getting stronger and stronger. I mean, because more trade among emerging market countries, because they don't have the contagion, they don't have to worry about some toxic thing coming out of the United States or the eurosclerosis that they see. I mean, this is kind of another sub-trend that we're seeing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's sort of the whole kind of BRIC platform, which obviously is now much...
I didn't say the word, but BRIC.
It's moved much beyond the... It's a platform I think everybody recognises, but it's obviously now much bigger, and you're looking at a larger number of countries involved in it. And, and I think that's a good thing that those countries sort of in that large emerging category are now discussing matters of common interest. But here again, I would say that we are seeing kind of like that them and us emerging a little bit. And say in relation to currency, obviously emerging markets, central banks, I think quietly and sometimes publicly complain about what the US Fed and what the ECB are doing and say, like, hey, there's contagion to us. And we've seen a great deal of volatility in Asian currencies and Latin American currencies, much less so in Russia. And Russia's been relatively, a haven in emerging market currencies. But elsewhere there's been a great deal of volatility. And they're pointing the finger to the Fed and they're pointing the finger to the ECB and saying, you're doing what suits you without taking into account, the effect on us. And I think there's, I wouldn't like to overstate this in any way, but you know, you can definitely see that there are some kind of, let's have a meeting amongst ourselves to see what our strategy is at the G20 rather than being part of it. So
all right, on
that's
that
a
note,
danger.
we've run out of time, gentlemen. Many thanks to my guests, and thanks to our viewers for watching us here on The Money. See you next time, and stay with RT.